Good evening, and welcome to the Boston Public Library's Local History and Revolutionary Ideas lecture series. As part of our program, we want to read the following statement to bring attention to the land which we use for our building and events. We acknowledge that the Boston Public Library's Central Library stands on land that was once a water-based ecosystem, providing sustenance for the indigenous Massachusetts people, and is a place which has long served as a site of meeting and exchange among nations. We are committed to land acknowledgements for all locations at which we operate. We reaffirm this commitment to set the context for our planning, deliberations, and public engagement, which will take place from the spirit of welcome and respect found in our motto, Free to All. Tonight, we are very pleased to have Mark Kurlansky and Ted Widmer here to talk about the book, The Boston Way: Radicals Against Slavery and the Civil War. Mark Kurlansky was born in Hartford in 1948. He graduated from Butler University with a degree in theater in 1970 and refused to serve in the Vietnam War and has opposed every war since. His book, Nonviolence: The History of a Dangerous Idea, won the Dayton Literary Peace Prize. He has written several best-selling books, including Cod and Salt, and 1968, The Year That Rocked the World, as well as a number of books for young readers, 6 books of fiction, and a translation of a French classic by Émile Zola. This is his 40th book. Ted Widmer is a historian, writer, librarian, musician, and a distinguished professor at Macaulay Honors College at City University of New York. His most recent book, Lincoln on the Verge, 13 Days to Washington, won the Lincoln Forum Book Prize and charts the president's pivotal 13-day journey to Washington for his inauguration. Questions will be taken at the end of the discussion, and copies of the books are for sale and signing after the program.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay? Welcome to the BPL. Great to see you all. Great to be with Mark talking about, here it is, The Boston Way, published by a Boston publisher, Godine. And we're going to talk a lot about Boston tonight and why it was such a hotbed of abolitionist thinking in the 19th century. I need to begin with a confession, and Mark may want to join you. We both love Boston. We're sort of from Boston in different ways. We currently both live in the bad city. In fact, we just found out we live very near each other on the Upper West Side of New York. But I'm pretty Boston. I was born in Boston. I grew up here until I was 6, and then half the time, many years after that, and then I lived here for about 20 years. So I think I pass. Although some standards are very strict. If you have to spend every minute of your life here, I'm not Bostonian, but I'm pretty. And how about you, Mark?
Well, I'm sort of dicey. I was actually raised in Hartford, but my father was from Boston, and my family was here, and they lived in Dorchester, and I grew up playing off of Blue Hill Avenue with my cousins, so that's some kind of credential.
That's pretty
right?
good. Yeah, that's good street cred for sure. So there's so much in the short bio we just heard about your own commitment to nonviolence that seems connected to this fine work of 19th century history. And were you thinking about Boston as when your own nonviolence was beginning, were you also thinking about these older Boston traditions?
Well, I kind of have a long connection. When I was a little kid, I was very taken with the Ban the Bomb movement. And then, of course, along came the Vietnam War.
Right.
And I was drafted. So, got sort of personal. And, but I've always thought in that way. And you would think, well, of course, that's why I got to this story about these incredible people in Boston. But that's really not how I got to them. And this is like, this tells you something about me. I have a fascination with cookbooks and recipes, old recipes. I think they're great historic relics that tell you about a time and place. And in 1829, a book was published called The Frugal Housewife. And
Published here in Boston.
published in Boston,
Yeah.
yes. And it was unusual for its time because it was about food for common people. And this was generations before Mrs. Beeton, Fanny Farmer, and that whole movement. It was at a time when cookbooks were about what rich people ate, but this one wasn't. And so I always valued this cookbook because it gave you this insight into what people were eating in New England in the 1820s. So who was this rebellious cookbook writer? It was Lydia Maria Child, who it turns out was really the first woman literary star of American letters. Wrote a couple of very well-received novels and the first English language magazine for children, and a very respected writer. And then she wrote really the definitive work on abolition. And that kind of changed everything. Got her some new friends and got a lot of people against her. Like the Athenaeum, she was only the second woman to ever have research privileges in the Athenaeum.
Wow.
And after she wrote her abolition book, they took away her privileges. And she belonged to this group that I started, because originally I had this idea of just writing about her and her husband, which was a very interesting marriage of equal partners committed to political causes. And good stories, and I almost thought of writing it as a novel. And then I started getting involved with the people that she was involved with, like William Lloyd Garrison and Frederick Douglass, and this extraordinary group of people, men and women, black and white, at a time when women and black people were never supposed to weigh in on political things. And this was one of the reasons people got angry with her when she wrote her book on abolition. Who was this woman to write about a political issue? But they were very much first and foremost committed to abolition, but also to the rights of women, the rights of indigenous people, the fair treatment for immigrants. They opposed capital punishment. William Lloyd Garrison said prison was the only door that was open for any black man. Central to their beliefs and the way they operated was this belief in nonviolence, that you could not use violence to solve an issue. And they believed that, they said that if slavery was ended through violence, it would take 100 years for black people to get their rights. So here we are, 150 years later, arguing about the Voters' Rights Act. So it really was a strong conviction that although it was seemingly impossible and very difficult to change the minds of slavers through nonviolence, that they had no choice, that this was the only way that this could work.
So was Lydia Maria Child your point of entry? Was it the book? That's so interesting. Because, I mean, she's very alive in your book. Everyone is, but Garrison is extremely alive. So you really make him vivid. And so I might have guessed that he was the first person you read about. But that's so fascinating that it was through her and her cookbook. Oh, and thank you.
I would have to say that years earlier when I did my nonviolence book, I did write about William Lloyd Garrison.
Okay.
So he wasn't new to me.
And by the way, there's a very good exhibit called Revolution in the other building that
I noticed that. Yeah.
I just stopped at briefly, and very a powerful daguerreotype of Garrison right in the middle of it, and a bust of Wendell Phillips. So your people are
Yeah.
there.
Wendell Phillips was an aristocrat who was one of the strongest advocates of nonviolence and opposed the Civil War all during the Civil War. A lot of them caved, but he never did.
Well, thank you for the recipe for Indian pudding.
Indian pudding,
Yeah,
yeah.
I enjoyed that, and I thought even with my limited skills, it's clear enough that I might be able to. I mean, as you say.
And there's a good pumpkin pie recipe too.
Okay.
You know, I can't help myself. If I do a book, there's got to be some recipes. You know?
Well, these are heavy political ideas, but it's very readable, and you make this group, the Boston Clique, you succeed in making them complicated in an interesting way. They're not just names to be memorized in a history book. They have good years and bad years, and they all know each other. They help each other, although sometimes there are little rivalries and jealousies.
They meet for tea.
Right.
Not far from here. And yeah, that was my one problem with them, is that among all these things that they opposed, that I applauded, they also opposed the drinking of alcohol. It's kind of disappointing because it, ruined this whole fantasy I had that somewhere in the ether I would sit down and have a drink with them.
Yeah, nobody's perfect. Yeah. The Transcendentalists in Concord took a while to warm up to the Boston Clique, it seemed like. The Bostonians were a little too direct in their politics, too close to politics maybe for Emerson and Thoreau, although they all came together later.
Well, Emerson and Garrison had an interesting relationship because they respected each other. Emerson thought that Garrison was, I believe he said, too one-dimensional, too focused. And Garrison thought that Emerson was too intellectually complicated. And I think they might both be right.
Yeah.
But, the transcendentalism, which I don't know if anybody completely understands, I certainly don't, but one of the premises of it is that you have to stand up for who you are and what you believe. So transcendentalists had enormous respect for these Boston people because
Yeah.
that's what they were doing.
One interesting feature of all the members of the clique that occurred to me is that many of them come to Boston from a neighboring town. Like Garrison is from Newburyport,
Right.
I think. Someone's from Billerica.
Child is from Medford.
Yeah, right.
Somebody's from Waterford, and they're, but that's Boston.
Yeah.
And Boston at that time was building bridges, literally, that were connecting places like Concord to Boston. So it was an easy carriage ride. And, it's kind of interesting the role that Boston played in America at the time, because Boston was by no means one of the big cities in America, much, much smaller than New York or Philadelphia or Baltimore. And yet it was a kind of an intellectual center. It was the printing and publishing center, and it was a place of ideas and theologians and philosophers and people like Emerson, and it kind of had a reputation a bit like San Francisco in the 60s, It was kind of kooky. There were communes and, Roxbury. It's hard to think of it now, but Roxbury was all a green area where they had all these communes with nature, and experimented with free love and all these things.
There's some racy stuff going on. There's some free love.
When following this, their story, sometimes I felt like I had been caught up in a French comedy. They were all chasing around. Everybody was crazy for Margaret Fuller, and Thoreau was crazy for everybody. You know, it was this big move to get him on the boat.
That was all news to me. I think of him as this solitary philosopher by Walden Pond, and
Yeah, well,
he's
Walden
basically
Pond,
hitting on everybody, trying to get them into his rowboat.
in his boat, that's what Walden Pond was about, didn't you know?
Well, the Fuller story was also very revealing to me, including the extraordinary way in which she perished off of Fire Island. And she seems in some ways in the middle of it, but also a little bit of an outlier.
Yeah, well, she was a transcendentalist, but more importantly, she was a feminist, like Mariah Child. And there was a connection there. There was the Peabody sisters had a bookstore. Peabody was the first woman publisher. And she had this bookstore, and I believe it was Wednesday night, women would get together to talk about politics. And this was extraordinary because women weren't supposed to talk about politics. And this was kind of where the transcendentalists and the clique met.
I made a note of the street. You provided it, but West Street,
West
which
Street,
is
right.
where the Brattle bookstore is today, if any of you know that wonderful bookstore. So that must be very close to the same location.
Yes, well, West Street was where publishing was located and
No
where the
kidding.
important bookstores
I didn't
were.
know that. It's not a very long street.
No. Boston wasn't a very big city
Yeah.
then.
Well, you really convey the importance of printing, as you say, and that's Garrison's trade. He's a very adept printer. He gets his.
He got his start as a printer in the Newburyport
He's like
newspaper.
a printer's apprentice or something, or
Well, originally an ink maker, and then he became a printer, a typesetter.
he
and-
literally has the ink under his fingernails.
Yes,
Yeah.
and you know, they used to take the letters, and you put them on you had this strip, and you placed them on there, and you got a line of type, and then you set it, and you did another line, and he could do this as quickly as writing.
Wow.
You know, he could just sit there composing an article like this.
Are you a printer or a historian of print? Because you just make it sound so exciting.
Well, I wrote a book about the history of paper, and I learned a lot about that.
And then when Frederick Douglass comes to New England, which, by the way, I had forgotten a few stages of his story. I thought he just went to Rochester, New York, and I forgot the New Bedford phase and how important Garrison was to him.
Yeah,
But
in
then-
Boston.
And then he becomes a printer too, and I thought that was a.
Yeah, and he escaped, came to New York, and got placed in New Bedford because in Maryland, where he came from, he had experienced caulking ships, so he became a caulker in New Bedford, which had a very large, both free black and escaped black population. So it was sort of a safe place for him to go. The guy who put him there gave him the name Frederick Douglass. It wasn't his original name.
That's right, Bailey.
Bailey, yeah.
Right.
And he was, back when he was a slave, he could read and write, and he kept running across this word abolitionism, and he didn't know what it meant. And he looked it up, and it said abolishing, but it didn't say what it was abolishing. And he started asking around and quickly caught on that it was something he wasn't supposed to talk about. But when he first read Garrison's paper, The Liberator, it was just a revelation to him. But he was a revelation to Garrison.
Yeah.
Garrison came to New Bedford, and he was giving a speech, and Garrison said, we got to get this guy on the program. He was just this great speaker and just powerful, charismatic presence. It's interesting, in the book, I begin each chapter with a portrait of one of them. And this was at a time when photography was new, and a lot of people didn't know what to make of it. And you see in some of these portraits, a lot of people are sitting there sort of uncomfortably. But Douglass, understood the power of photography. And you look at the portrait of him here, and
It's stunning.
so powerful.
It's incredible.
Staring right into the
Yeah.
camera, and it was this program he had. He was, they say, the most photographed man in America in the 19th century. And what he was trying to do with photography is show what a black man really looked like, away from all of the racist stereotypes, and this man of tremendous power and dignity. And look at the picture in the book, it's just stunning.
I got the feeling from your book that the phenomenon of Douglass, which is so important in the 19th century, would not have been possible without the infrastructure of the Boston clique, and Garrison especially, that Garrison sees him as a star, and
Yes.
maybe doesn't make him a star, but
Well, they went on the road together. Garrison himself was quite a speaker. And, you know, speaking was the main means of communicating. Speeches that went on for hours.
Right.
They'd travel around the country together and to England and give speeches on abolition. And of course, everywhere they went, they were greeted by people throwing rocks at them. And angry, it was called the mobocracy. And finally, a mob grabbed Garrison, put a rope around him, and started dragging him through the streets of Boston. And he had enough followers that his followers said, you know, we can free you. And he said, no, let them do it. And he let them drag him by rope through the streets of what's now downtown, and made no attempt to resist whatsoever, and gained a lot of following. People were amazed by his presence and the way he could use nonviolence, what they called then non-resistance. Non-resistance was a funny phrase because non-resistance was their form of resisting.
right. Maybe in an era before the subway getting dragged by a crowd to the next block was a faster way to no, I'm trying to make something funny and it's not funny. But you get a feeling of the mob violence threatening the civic order over and over, especially after the Fugitive Slave Act.
Yes, after the Fugitive Slave Act, which was passed by Congress, and basically said that a slave was a slave owner's property, so that if a slave escaped to the north and was kept allowed to live in the north, this was stolen property. And federal agents would go, I mean, this really resonates today. These federal agents would go into northern cities and kidnap these people and bring them back to the South. And this really angered people. And it actually threatened nonviolence. I mean, this was one of the points that with Frederick Douglass in particular. Frederick Douglass was nonviolent, but he said that you should violently resist these fugitive slave kidnappers.
No, I thought of ICE a few times
Yes,
in your book, I must say. And I'm working separately on it's not really a book by me, it's an edited book about the Declaration of Independence and what it has meant to every generation. But I was reading revolutionary accounts of Boston in the 1760s and 1770s, and it wasn't just the payment of taxes that was driving Bostonians to the edge. It was this feeling that they were under surveillance, that they could be arrested without proper cause, that the people arresting them didn't identify themselves. So it's a persistent strain in Boston's history.
Right, and also these people that I write about were the children and grandchildren of people in the American Revolution. And the American Revolution, maybe it's just my generation, but I think it became fictionalized by Disney.
Yeah, right.
And there's this idea that it was a kind of a nice, fun war. It was a bitter, bitter conflict with a tremendous amount of suffering. And so these people had this family history of suffering to build a new kind of society. And these people were saying, wait a minute, this isn't the free society. This isn't what the Declaration of Independence says. This is, you know, we enslave people, we don't give women their rights, we abuse indigenous people. This is not what our parents were fighting for.
That's why John Quincy Adams was so powerful a speaker against, because he had the direct connection to not only a founder, but the founder who, next to Jefferson, was closest to being an author of the Declaration. So.
Yeah, and one of the things that really was educational to me in researching this book was the realization that Adams and John Quincy Adams were the only anti-slave presidents.
Right.
Other presidents, including Northern President Franklin Pierce, who was a New Englander,
Right.
who was pro-slavery.
Right.
And all of the houses and senates were pro-slavery.
I think it was almost the only way you could become president, was you just had to agree to not interfere with slavery where it existed, and then get into the 1850s, you had to agree with their schemes to spread it to Kansas and Nebraska.
Right, which is what you've written about what Lincoln was all about.
Right.
Lincoln was not going to get elected as an anti-slave. He wasn't an anti-slave person at all.
He was against the expansion of slavery, but he not.
Yes, which was the old principle that, that's what Jefferson and all those people said. We're not going to stop slavery, but we're not going to let it expand.
Right.
And then starting with Maine, Missouri, where Maine was part of Massachusetts and became independent, but the Congress would only allow Maine to become a state if Missouri could become a slave state. And slavery was expanding. And, the whole history of Texas, which is one of the greatest lies in American history.
Wonderful chapter. Bad year.
Yeah, I mean, so we're told that, the people in Texas fought for freedom against the Mexican dictator. Actually, the only problem with the Mexican dictator was that he outlawed slavery. And all these people who came to Texas were Southern slavers, the boys at the Alamo they weren't fighting for freedom, they were fighting for slavery.
Yeah. You have a few bad years. 1848 has some good in it also, but you're quite interested in the qualities of a specific year. I mean, you wrote 1968 too, but I felt like in 1848 had some of the same feeling, the revolutions beginning in Europe.
Well, it was a huge year in Europe, but in the U.S. also, and the beginning of the feminist movement.
Oh, right, Seneca Falls.
Seneca Falls, Boston people in Seneca Falls.
Right.
And this group that I read about was really the origin of the feminist movement. Susan B. Anthony was one of them, and Katie Stanton, and Frederick Douglass, for the rest of his life, was a strong advocate for women's rights.
Yeah, that was quite powerful. You not only elevate women throughout the book, treated with equal attention from you as all the male abolitionists, but you go very deeply into the complexity of marriage. And some of these couples were in difficult marriages, but Lydia, Mariah, Child, and David, Child.
Difficult but interesting marriages.
Yeah, difficult but interesting, exactly.
They really were partners.
Right.
And
she gave up a lot of her lucrative future potential.
Well, in the case of the Childs, the problem there was her husband, David Child, was the one Boston lawyer who couldn't make any money.
Right.
And she was always covering for him because she could make money from her publishing. But he was really dedicated to his causes, and that's what his life was about, and it's what her life was about. They didn't always see things eye to eye.
Yeah.
For example, on nonviolence, when there was the Kansas War, which was one of the real challenges for a nonviolent movement, where Kansas was trying to become a free state, and slavers from Missouri were moving in because they had ruled that they would let the population decide whether it was free or slave, and so these people from Missouri came, very violent people. They called them ruffians, and a war was unleashed, and that's where John Brown got his name. John Brown slaughtered people with a sword in front of their families. He was really violent, and his whole idea of abolition became to provoke violence and to bring about a civil war, and that's how you would end slavery.
I mean, that's a great.
But I was going to say that while this is going on, Mariah Child is packing up clothes and food for the abolitionists in Kansas. And while she's doing that, her husband David is packing up weapons.
So they don't agree with each
Right.
other. That's a fascinating tension in the book, that there's this ideal of nonviolence. We link to Gandhi and perhaps to Martin Luther King. The exhibit, by the way, in the other building is great on King's connections to Boston, which are deep. And Gandhi read Thoreau's Civil Disobedience, isn't that right? So
In jail.
in jail.
Right.
So it goes
Which is where you should read it, right?
right. It goes from Boston to India, and then King picks it up from Gandhi and
Right.
comes back to Boston.
And not only Thoreau, but other nonviolent advocates they were picked up by Tolstoy. Tolstoy
right.
would translate them into Russian, and then Tolstoy had a connection with Gandhi, and Gandhi would learn about them. But when you look at the things that were done, because this Boston group was not only trying to end slavery in the South, but they were trying to end racism in Massachusetts. And what were they doing? They were having freedom rides on trains. They were having
60s.
lunch counter boycotts.
Yeah, exactly the same.
They even had freedom songs. It looked just like the
Wow.
civil rights movement.
So this tension is becomes so interesting. I was starting to say this and then I interrupted myself, but the ideal of nonviolence, beautiful ideal, unites so many of these independent thinkers, but nonviolence is not going to be in the future because Kansas, Nebraska is very violent, and that's just a prelude to the Civil War, the most violent war in American history. And you feel for them, and some of them are trying to stay true to nonviolence, but others are looking at the situation. We have to have a war. It's the only way to get rid of this.
And then when the war broke out, this idea of having black soldiers, the Massachusetts 54th, when they were sent off, was the largest street celebration in the history of Boston.
Wow.
And a lot of these were sons of the nonviolent people, including Frederick Douglass and Garrison.
Amazing.
And how, I just try to imagine how Garrison felt spending his life in nonviolence, standing there on the corner of State Street, watching his son march off to war.
But he himself was getting close. I mean, he approved, didn't he? He thought it was the right thing at that point.
He sort of saw a transactional thing, that if you could bring Lincoln over to abolitionism, then the war might be worthwhile.
Right.
And the Emancipation Proclamation was this classically brilliant piece of Lincoln, where he actually didn't emancipate any slaves at all, because he said that slaves are emancipated in places that are controlled by the Confederacy, because he didn't want to alienate the border states.
Right.
So they weren't in a position to liberate anybody. But it made a statement that from now on, this is what the war was going to be about. And the Union Army, when they went into places, started liberating the slaves. Before that, they didn't.
Right.
They'd go into a place and liberate it and let let them keep their slaves as slaves.
Yeah, Lincoln even countermanded an order
Yes.
early in the war. Fremont, I think it was, because it was in the early part of the war. He couldn't lose those border states, but
Right.
later, exactly. Later, it became the cause of the war.
Well, it was like so many people had died that it had to stand for something.
Right, right. It's
But if you look at his most famous speech, the Gettysburg Address, he doesn't say anything about slavery. He says about preserving the American Revolution, the government of the people, for the people, by the
he
people.
says a new birth of freedom, which could be understood.
Right.
But
That was a typically Lincoln-esque.
Right. So in this fascinating drama of the nonviolent people being pulled toward violence, there's this character who comes in 3/4 of the way through your book with a huge amount of charisma, and he's, well, you quote Melville, weird John Brown. And he's a very dynamic character.
Yeah, he started out like the rest of them. He was a New Englander, nonviolent activism, and he just gradually became obsessed with violence and constant plans. He was the abolitionist that the South thought Garrison was.
Right, exactly.
The South would always accuse Garrison of plotting for slave rebellions, and Garrison would say, "Why would a slave need me to inspire a rebellion?" But Brown didn't understand that a white guy wasn't going to start a black revolution, and he just kept pushing for violence. And after Harper's Ferry, which was a complete fiasco, he presented it to Frederick Douglass, and before he did it, and Douglass said, "This is crazy," didn't want anything to do with it. And after it failed, and he was put on trial, wounded, sitting there on a pallet, it was his moment. It was the moment he'd been waiting for. Suddenly, this ferocious John Brown is this mild-mannered, kindly person.
Right, Christ-like.
Right.
Yeah. It was fascinating to see the way he sort of bewitched a number of the members of the clique. He certainly had charisma and courage, but as you say, his plan was awful, and the plan was bad to begin with, and it was executed even worse. But then, exactly, a kind of transformation, and on trial, he became a martyr, and Thoreau wrote very positively.
Emerson.
Emerson. Those guys who'd been more hesitant to be anti-slavery at the beginning. Now,
Right.
Yeah.
And had viewed John Brown as insane.
Right.
John Brown looked insane. And there was this one photograph in particular that was circulated. It said, "Look at this guy. Isn't this a madman?"
So we're getting near, it's 6:40, and we'd love to have questions from all of you. Maybe I'll just ask a couple more, but I hope there's a mic. Is there a microphone? Yes, in the back. So what does this careful study of Boston's activists in the 19th century teach us in a difficult moment in the 21st century?
Well, I think this is a good moment to be looking at people who believed two things: that when you see something that's wrong, you have to do something about it. You cannot be idle about it. You have to act. And the other belief is that that action has to be nonviolent. Mm-hmm. These are the people we want.
Right. Who are your 20th century heroes? I think of Dr. King. He was nonviolent. Was he important to you? And are there others that you look up to from the 20th century?
Yeah, and I mean, from the civil rights movement, Bayard Rustin.
Yes.
And Farmer, and
Yep.
But also Desmond Tutu in South Africa.
Yep.
And
Mandela.
Everybody always says that, but Mandela was not nonviolent. Tutu was nonviolent, and
Yep.
that's what turned the whole thing.
Yep.
there was a woman who stood in a plaza in Buenos Aires and made one of the most vicious dictatorships in history fall. It can work.
So do you have any advice for us who are wondering what to do?
I often think of my old friend Howard Zinn,
Oh yeah, be
a
you.
Bostonian.
Yeah.
And Howard used to say that the wonderful thing about being a writer is you get up on a stage, they give you a microphone, and suddenly you know everything. I wish I could tell you what to do and now go out and do it. It's much more difficult than that. But I would say that those ideas of the Boston clique, that you have to act and you have to act nonviolently, are things that we should be embracing.
I must say I struggle with something as a historian like you. I work in the study of the past, and I have always believed that there's a kind of linear progress, that things are bad before the American Revolution, then there's a bloody war, and things are better. And things are bad before the Civil War, and then there's a bloody war, and things are better. And then things are not great for African Americans in the 1950s and 60s, and then there's this powerful movement, and things get better. And now with the Supreme Court probably going to look at the Voting Rights Act again, history does not feel so linear. It feels almost circular, like we're going backwards.
Yeah, but we think like that because it's our generation. These Boston people that I write about, they didn't see it like that.
Yeah.
They saw it getting worse. They saw America getting worse. I mean, Texas and the Mexican War and Kansas, and it was just getting worse and worse. I mean, my book is about a period from the 1820s to the 1860s in which America steadily got worse.
Right.
So it doesn't always get better.
Right. Any questions out there?
Hi, thank you. I'm a early U.S. history teacher, high school, 10th grade, and I'm trying a new project this year with my co-teacher where we're asking students for every era that we study to design a memorial of somebody who's like an untold story in American history. So we're doing the founding era right now. We're like, there's enough statues of George Washington. What would a memorial to like Paul Cuffey or Elizabeth Freeman look like? So I'm curious, who would you recommend are untold stories related to your era that you're discussing, because we'll be getting to that in December, that you wish some 10th grader Bostonian high school students would design memorials to?
Well, what I'd love you to look at is a man named Nell, who was from Boston and integrated Boston schools, black man. In my book, there was another man named Charles Redmond. There's a number of black activists. I mean, we all know about Frederick Douglass, and we should know about Frederick Douglass, but the problem with Frederick Douglass is that he upstaged everybody, and there were all these other incredible black activists, including black women, the first black women to ever make public addresses.
Is Child remembered anywhere?
The only thing that Child is remembered for is she wrote the line, "Across the river and into the woods to grandfather's house."
Oh, really?
Go. Yes. It was her
That's
Thanksgiving poem.
Other questions?
I'm just wondering what you mean, like, what's the different, like, could you elaborate on how Frederick Douglass, not Frederick Douglass, the Adams were anti-slave at the time? Was it, like, for the time, or, like, were they objectively anti-slavery?
They were opposed to slavery. They wanted it to stop. I should point out that they were both one-term presidents, very unpopular.
Yeah. John Quincy Adams goes back into the House after being
Yes.
defeated after his one term, and that was his great period as an anti-slavery speaker.
Yes,
And he was fearless. He would just stand up and say,
He was the great abolitionist voice in Congress.
yes.
Yeah.
And he lives all the way until 1848, so that was a good long time. Or a couple.
So, is there a chance in your thinking about where this story begins, the story you write here, which I haven't read yet, but I will? Is there a chance that it originates in Massachusetts because slavery was eliminated in Massachusetts so early, 1780? I wonder. You think yes?
It was 1790. It was eliminated. But
Well, the Constitution of the state was written in 1780, and it was the interpretation of that Constitution that yielded the lack of, or the elimination of slavery. So do you think it was, in fact, because there was no slavery in the state that the instigation of abolitionism here was so strong?
well, this was true in a lot of northern states, that they had slavery and they eliminated it. No, I think what made it so strong in Boston was this idea that Boston was the center and the heart of the American Revolution. And, you know, when you talk about freedom, you're talking about Boston. And this was greatly believed by these Bostonians and by many Bostonians.
Do you have any, have you drawn any connections between the British abolitionist movement and the American one and the Boston one, how they influenced each other, the sequence and so forth?
Yeah, a lot. Garrison and Douglas and Redmond, a lot of them went to England, and some of the British abolitionists went to Boston. In fact, the incident where the mob attacked Garrison was over a meeting where a British abolitionist was coming to speak. The British had achieved abolition, and so there was this dialogue about how to get it done. Of course, it was a very different kind of a deal because slavery wasn't in Britain; it was out away in colonies. In the Caribbean. And yes, and these colonies were not profitable. The slave economy in Jamaica and these other places was failing, and you know, Jefferson had thought that slavery would die out for the same reason, that it would be an economic failure. And then, you know, along came this guy with the cotton gin.
Right. A New Englander.
A New Englander,
Yeah.
Connecticut, I think.
Yeah.
There was a lot of conversation between them. The British encouraged the Americans to get women involved. Women had been very involved in the movement in England. And there are examples, there were fairs in Boston to raise money for the cause. And the British would contribute these beautiful silver tea sets to auction off to raise money for the abolitionist cause. And there were a lot of connections.
One more question. Are there places, you know, churches, bars, restaurants where these guys used to get together? I mean, was there a social network where the abolitionists were in regular contact with each other?
Yeah, there were a few. I'm not sure if any of it. I keep meaning to hunt around and see if there's any plaques up or any of it is marked, but there was.
Well, the Peabody's home on West Street was one place.
Yeah, and is that marked?
No, I don't think so.
No, I don't think it is. And there were these people, the Chapmans, downtown somewhere.
Where was Garrison's home and shop?
Right near Fennel Hall,
Oh,
which is funny because he came from Newburyport, and he arrived by stagecoach in Boston, and it let him out in that spot. And it was sort of like this Dickinsonian thing of, the boy in Boston, and he never moved from that spot. But yeah, there were certain, and there was a part of Beacon Hill. That's probably still marked, the black church. And
yes, and there's a museum of African American history
right.
on the backside of Beacon Hill.
Right, because the backside of Beacon Hill was a black neighborhood.
So I have a question about Lincoln. So when I was a kid, I read all the kids' books about Lincoln. He was my childhood hero. And there was a story about him going down to New Orleans and seeing the slavery auctions and stating something to the effect of, someday if I can hit this, I'm going to hit it hard. But we talk about how he wasn't that anti-slavery. It was about other issues in the war. So I want to talk a little bit. Was that a myth? Was he anti-slavery or not?
Well, he famously elaborated his position that he was out to save the Union. And if he could save the Union by ending slavery, fine. If he could save the Union by keeping slavery, fine. If he could do something in between, that would be fine. What I want to do is just save the Union.
But your story is true about something powerful happened in his childhood in New Orleans. He grows up around the Ohio River. I mean, he's a very poor kid and no schooling really to speak of. And when he was about 16, 17, his family had moved from Kentucky to Indiana, not even very far, but from a slave state to a relatively free state. And that made a big difference. And with a friend, he got on a flatboat, and they took it, must have been almost 1,000 miles all the way to New Orleans. And it was a teenage adventure, kind of like Huck Finn. But then he saw terrible things. A woman being sold, and I think the men were removing her clothing as they were bidding up the auction price. And he said something, if I ever get a chance, I'm going to hit that thing hard, meaning slavery. And there's a lot of evidence on both sides. I think I certainly read, he was my childhood hero also. And that kind of simple Lincoln who just was born to get rid of slavery. And it is more complicated than that. And Mark makes many good points, and that letter to Horace Greeley is what Mark is citing, that if I could save the Union by eliminating slavery, I would. If I could save it by not eliminating slavery, I would. But I think that letter is disingenuous because at the time he wrote it, he was absolutely planning to end slavery. So I think it's kind of a cover to say, it could go up or down. I'm just trying to save the Union, but he's absolutely trying to end slavery. He just has political enemies everywhere and wants to let it happen slowly and under the guise of a military necessity, which is what the Emancipation was presented as. But it was, and Mark says this in the book, it was also very significant because it finally said we actually are fighting to end slavery. And then as the Northern armies went further into the South, they did free a lot of slaves.
I don't think there's any doubt that Lincoln hated slavery.
Right.
Lincoln was a profoundly, behind his sort of country bumpkin thing, he was an extremely sophisticated, savvy politician.
Yes.
And he was always trying to figure out how this played.
Right. There are wonderful sources on Lincoln's youth. He had a law partner named William Herndon, who after Lincoln died, Herndon went around to everyone who'd ever known him, and it's one of the great oral histories of American history. He just said, tell me what you remember, and he got all these letters sent to him, and he went around and met people and wrote down. And I think the story of New Orleans comes from one of those. But there are new editions of Herndon's gathering of information about Lincoln that are really interesting. They're not filtered. It's just what people say. They knew what Lincoln was like when he was a young man. And everyone said he loved fairness. He would, two people were fighting, he'd go over and try to, a lot of that belief is true, that he just was against injustice. And so slavery obviously was a form of injustice. I have a book, it was mentioned in my introduction, but it's about Lincoln's train trip from Illinois to Washington to become president. It's only 13 days of his life, but he was in a great deal of trouble because there are conspiracy theories on both sides. You mentioned Southerners thought Bostonians were in a conspiracy to end, and a lot of Bostonians felt there was a Southern conspiracy to keep slavery or to spread it out in the West. And in this 13-day train trip, a lot of conspiracy theorists were going crazy. So,
Yeah. I think we should mention about Boston. Yes, they had all these abolitionists, but the Boston economy was built on slavery.
yes,
If the
cotton
abolitionists
mills.
had been able to get the mills to stop buying slave cotton and had gotten the sugar refineries, the area
Right.
where Logan is now was sugar refineries. If they had gotten them to stop buying slave sugar,
Right.
it could have ended slavery. And these people who were getting very wealthy off of the textile mills and the sugar and all that, that's why they hated people like Mariah Child, because
Right.
they viewed them as trying to ruin everything, destroy the economy.
Right. Yeah, Lowell and Lawrence and Fall
Right.
River, and yeah. Just a couple minutes left. Any? Oh, yes, sir, in the back.
What inspired you to write at this period of time in history about it?
Well, I feel that you're trying to get me to say that I had a plan here. I've actually been working on this book for a number of years, and it'd be nice to say I'm a political activist. I'm not. I'm first and foremost a storyteller, and I saw in this a great story that I wanted to tell. And when I finally finished it and it was finally published, it just turned out to be the perfect time to come out with this story. But it wasn't all a plan. It just worked out that way.
No, I'm not trying. Why did you go to this period of time in history to write about the history of that time, as opposed to some other time?
I'm not sure
Okay, I apologize.
No, I'm just
In
not.
other words, something inspired you to talk about the period of time that you talked about in the book.
So why do you like the 19th century so much?
Oh, I see.
Thank you.
Well, it was a really critical period in looking at American history. Really shaped. There was the American Revolution, and we've got this thing, and what are we going to do with it? And then you got to look at the next few decades to see.
Yeah. So are the wheels spinning for your next project now? Mark's written 40 books.
I have my next book is actually about lobsters.
Really?
Yes. I have
sequel
a
to
personal
Todd?
relation with lobsters. I worked on lobster boats when I was a kid, and
Wow.
and
Where?
well, I was on a boat out of Fisher's Island, but that we fished the trenches off of Rhode Island.
I'm also from Rhode Island, in addition to being from Boston and New York. But we don't have many lobsters in Narragansett Bay. It's too warm, so they've all gone up to Maine.
Well, southern New England has really lost its lobsters for
Yeah.
a variety of reasons.
So will this be like a scientific book about, or a cultural history?
Yes.
That's great. I can't wait. Can't wait to read that.
Of course.
Do you like a warm or a cold lobster roll?
I actually, untrue to my native Connecticut, I like a cold lobster roll.
Well, I bet we'd get a good Bostonian argument over that question. Well, I have that it's 7 o'clock, and I know Mark is eager and ready to sign copies of his book, which is for sale right outside the door. We can keep the conversation going up there, but I think it's good to end on time. So thank you all for coming out. Appreciate it.
Thank you.